Welcome, everybody, to the Old Time Boxing Show on the Grizzly Truth Sports Network. I am your host for the Old Time Boxing Show, Mike Goodpaster, and I want to remind you guys that we are brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation with Alex Ramos and Jackie Richardson. Make sure you check them out on Facebook. And today, of course, we're doing the Old Time Boxing Show, as I always do, with my co-host, Christopher Shelton. How you doing, Chris?
Good, Mike. Do another heavyweight boxer from the past, and a good one, I hope.
Yeah, well, we can't hope. He was a good one.
He's a good one. We both really like him a lot. He's got kind of a real strong cult following during his time and even today. While some of them, it's still tough to grasp. Pinkley Thomas was so great at one time, but Mike Weaver is great. At his peak.
Yeah, one of the hardest punchers of all time, too, in the heavyweight division, I think. If you don't believe me, ask Larry Holmes, who told me he was. And I got a chance to interview Mike Weaver, who is the topic of our show today. He's a great guy, and he was a guy that really didn't start boxing until he went to the Marine Corps. From 1968 to 71, he went to Vietnam, started amateur boxing and training, and notably fought Dwayne Bobbick, a future Navy amateur star, in a fight where both were down and Weaver was outpointed. But I think that's what makes him so interesting, because he had next to no amateur career, Chris.
Yeah, and I guess he wasn't even originally meant to be a boxer. He was sent to Vietnam, but I guess he got in a fight with a Marine boxer, and kind of knocked him out. And they said, hey, maybe you should try out for boxing. And so he kind of just got into it sort of happenstance. And I know he fought both Bobbicks. He fought the Dwayne and the brother, I believe.
Rodney.
And one of them was a mutual knockdown too fight. So
and Rodney, a little known fact, on the undercard of the Thriller in Manila in the Philippines, Rodney was actually on the undercard and got stopped by Larry Holmes.
Oh wow! I never even think I've watched it a million times, and I must have known that at one time, but I didn't remember it. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I knew at one time and I can't remember.
Yeah,
but
this is growing for me.
Yeah, and when we look at his career, started off in 1972. He was living and training in California. He took up professional boxing. He was considered a journeyman opponent at that point. Was frequently brought in on short notice, overmatched against more experienced and developed boxers, which is why the record doesn't look that good. But the one thing that did help him out, and I know from talking to him, he said this, was he was a sparring partner out in L.A. for Muhammad Ali and Ken Norton.
Oh, well, that'll definitely gain you some experience. Yeah, his record for someone who we have great faith in, start out just not how you usually think of a champion. I think after 4 fights he was 1-3, and he just got knocked out in the second round, and it stayed even 500. Today, I like the idea that he's allowed to grow and stuff too. I really hate the idea that these guys have to fight a bunch of chumps, build up an undefeated record, and then one loss, and that's kind of the end of the world. Weaver wound up taking on all these guys with no losses, but he himself had to kind of go through the grind.
Yeah, and when you look at it, he fought the Bobbick brothers almost back-to-back, but he started his career off against Howard Smith, who he lost to twice. Howard Smith was a guy who, he was a fringe contender at one point. He fought Larry Frazier, who was a fringe contender, lost to him. Got beat by Rodney Bobbick by unanimous decision. And then he fought Dwayne Bobbick at the Coliseum in San Diego, and Bobbick stopped him in the 7th round.
And Bobbick's such a big guy, too. It's kind of a shame that my whole perception of Bobbick is just a couple of his losses getting knocked out in the first round by
Ken Norton and John Tate. Yeah.
Right, because he had built up a really strong amateur record, really great professional record, just a huge guy. And one of the things, Weaver, is probably a really fit-looking, tough-looking Marine, but these heavyweights all look a little bigger to him when he's in the ring. Weaver never looks remotely concerned, but these guys usually towered over him when he fought him, and Bobbick would have been one of them.
Well, the thing that was amazing in 1974, Mike Weaver was outweighed by like 17 pounds by Dwayne Bobbick. Bobbick was 215. Weaver only weighed 198. He'd be a cruiserweight today.
Yeah, and he was somebody who generally when you watch somebody's weight, you kind of see their conditioning and stuff, but he was sort of trying to figure out where he wanted to be. So sometimes he was around 2.7, and sometimes he was up around 2.15. He never looked out of shape. It never looked like he didn't try. He looked like he sort of sort of thinking of, I'm facing this guy, should I have a little more padding or should I give myself a little more room for endurance? He always looked physically fit, but he did alter his weight anywhere from, in his prime, anywhere from around 206 to around 215, mostly around 207.
Yeah, and the thing I remember as well as anything interviewing Mike Weaver a couple years ago was he really considered retiring after this fight, but Ken Norton, who he was friends with, actually convinced him to keep boxing.
Well, that's really cool too, because Ken Norton, of all the boxers I cover, he's such an articulate guy, such an intelligent guy. So I would love to know the tips he gave Mike Weaver, because Norton's a thinking man. It couldn't hurt for Weaver just to have kind of anything out there, because one of the things, again, we cover in his prime, it doesn't feel like he's got the same backing as some of these other guys. It feels like he's kind of out there on his own, even as a champion later. So yeah, any help he could get, thank goodness, because he's a pleasure to watch.
Yeah, and the thing is, after that, he went ahead and he went on a winning streak that kind of put him in contention. He had a win over Bill Sharkey, and the thing was, when he fought Sharkey, he weighed 195. Sharkey was a majority decision win, and Sharkey was a decent guy he was one of those guys that you kind of had to beat a contender. And then the win that really put him on the map was in 1977 when he, won a unanimous decision over Spider Rico.
Oh, I love that. Spider Rico was a good fighter. Not so much in the Rocky films, but in real life.
Yeah, Pedro Lavelle is who we're talking about, of course.
Right, but that's a good win against a tough Latino fighter who had a really great record when all said and done. And then had another kind of a tailspin, and then started picking himself up again. I'm thinking of the Leroy Jones fight. Leroy Jones, if you ever to describe him, he's undefeated, but he's also looked like he's way out of. He looks like he's tremendously out of shape. He looks like he's about 300 pounds.
Was. I mean, if you've ever watched Leroy Jones against Larry Holmes, what was it Howard Cosell called Jones? They show him, and he goes, well, this fat, grotesque man will fight Larry Holmes for the heavyweight championship.
That's what he looks like. He does. He looks like he's just had a six-pack of beers, out of shape, not ready, but I guess it's sort of always his form. And he, a big guy, but he just doesn't come across as tough as I like. But he had an undefeated record, and
he got a title shot off of that because Leroy Jones beat Weaver. Stan Ward also beat Weaver, and Stan Ward was a guy who at that point was right fringe top 10. He loses those two fights back to back. It doesn't look good. And then he comes and he stops Bernardo Mercado, who would actually be the number one contender by the time you get to 1980. I think it's just because he knew Don King really well, though.
Yeah, and what's disappointing for me is I can't actually watch the fight. I can only read it in a paper, because that'd be a hell of a 5-round not TKO for Weaver, and probably a really fun one to watch. But Weaver just so off the radar now because of the losses that there wasn't really any point. People really weren't paying attention to him. So all these early fights. ABC has some of them that they release in sort of snippets and stuff, but not all of it's easy to YouTube and stuff. But that's one I just love to watch, and hopefully I will get to watch it, but I couldn't this time around.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get to watch it because I've never been able to find it, and I've pretty much got everything that's findable. Next up, he upset Stan Ward for the vacant USBA heavyweight title, and this basically puts him back on the map because Ward, for some reason, was highly respected, even though I've watched him fight and nothing that special. But he beat Stan Ward, which was huge. And then Larry Holmes needs an opponent. And Madison Square Garden.
A tune-up.
Yeah. And ABC, CBS, and NBC all turned down the fight. So the fight was shown on HBO, which at that time only had like 2 million subscribers. So the fight was actually shown on closed circuit TV in 45 locations also. Holmes said he contracted flu during training camp because whenever you don't win as much as you should, then you got to have an excuse. But at least he didn't wear a 40-pound suit into the ring, and that wore him out. But this was a fight that I don't think anybody expected to be competitive. Weaver was 202 pounds. Holmes was 215, and on this night, the other thing I remember is there was 15,000 still at Madison Square Garden, but I think a lot of that was the co-main event was Roberto Duran against Carlos Palomino, which never hurts to sell tickets. But this was a fight
No.
where Weaver almost won the fight, and Holmes showed what great heart he had.
Well, Weaver really stole the show as far as the crowd. They didn't know who this guy was, and already by the second or third round, he's thinking, he's trying to give Holmes a fight. My girlfriend's watching this and getting really aggravated at Holmes because Holmes really is sort of treating it in a sort of mocking fashion with the hands down, kind of treating Weaver like it's nothing. There's an arrogance to Holmes until Weaver finally in the fourth round he starts landing some punches and Holmes is trying to back up and Weaver's hitting a couple more and Holmes is down, and that was really crazy and exciting. And you wonder if it's only going to be for a brief moment, but by the fifth, sixth round, the crowd's really into Weaver and Holmes looks troubled. And what I really love is Don King, worried so much about his millions of dollars and the Shavers Holmes fight being tainted, runs to Holmes' corner and stays there the rest of the time yelling at Holmes, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Get out there, beat this guy." But Weaver wasn't that easy to beat. And Holmes really did start doing a technician job of hanging in there, bicycling, I'll be honest, and once in a while throwing some punches and having to back off because he's slowly tiring Weaver, but it's getting closer and closer that by the end of the 10th round, they're saying, we may be looking at a new heavyweight champion. And that's out of nowhere from a guy that had already 8 losses. And the crowd just loved Weaver. And then finally, in the 11th round, Holmes was in his own corner, just looking like he was going to try to get some extra time on the rest for the minute. And Weaver left himself open to a shot, went down. And in the 12th, he gassed out. And Holmes won, but much more of a struggle than he could have imagined. And Mike Weaver was on the map that if he had never done anything else, you kind of remember that fight. At least one more.
And the thing about that fight is that fight puts him on the map for the rest of his life. Because
because it was rare.
That was as close as you could get to a Rocky story as you can get, if you know what I mean. A guy that nobody really took seriously. I don't remember if somebody got hurt while he got the fight or they were just burning through all the contenders and Larry Holmes was knocking them all out. They needed a guy, so that was your guy. But from there, Weaver becomes a staple on American television, and he wins a nondescript fight after that. And then he goes to Bloomington, Minnesota to battle the legendary Scott Ledoux, who weighed 220 pounds at that time. The bout was billed as for the U.S. heavyweight crown. And I remember watching this fight, and Weaver dominated the fight. One of the guys had it scored like 117, 111. The other two were more right because it was 117, 108, 118, 110. So
that is why Scott Ledoux has his fans too, because it was a slugfest for 4 or 5 rounds. Weaver was clearly winning, but it was still a hell of a good a slugfest. He knocked Ledoux down in the 6th round, though the referee didn't credit him. And then Weaver just starts going to a jab, and the jabs started really putting Scott Ledoux couldn't really do much against that jab, which is frustrating later with Larry Holmes to take on Ledoux when you think, oh man, this guy's a sucker for a jab, But it was a fun fight to watch, and the fans were really into it. And Weaver, it was nice to see him sort of think himself through the process of slugging out and then boxing, and then by the time you outboxed him, then it was a good fun 10-round easy decision victory with a knockdown that didn't get registered.
Yeah, I mean it was. I believe that our guy Weaver was, or not Weaver, but Tate was upset about the decision too because he always thought he won, even when he didn't.
Yeah, I know. Actually, you're right. At the end of the 10th round, he's raising his hands in victory. Like, what? Are you out of your mind? I mean, this isn't even a particularly close fight. It's just a fun fight in the sense of two guys, throwing punches for the first, 4 or 5 rounds.
Yeah, and then we get March 31st, 1980, the night that anybody that knows anything about boxing knows what happened. Now, the thing I remember about this night is this was a card. And so everybody realizes this was free TV on ABC. I forget, it was during the week. And this card, I think, started off with like Eddie Gregory destroying Marvin Johnson with body shots. And the fight after that was a Sugar Ray Leonard fight. Who did he, was this? I think it was him again. Davey Green?
Yeah, I mean that's it. Yeah,
that's what I thought, which was one of the most devastating knockouts you'll ever see. You had Holmes Weaver, or not Holmes Weaver, but you had Weaver against Tate, and then you had Leroy Jones against Larry Holmes. This was on one card for free on ABC, March 31st, 1980.
And Holmes is just, kicking back, like taking in the scenery, and they interview him like in the 10th or 11th round. He goes, clearly Weaver didn't even show up to fight. I don't even know why Weaver's there. You're not even trying. It's a waste of people's time. But watch my fight. My fight will be amazing, and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, because Tate, undefeated, he had lost in the Olympics to the Cuban, Stevenson. But Tate is just dominating Weaver as far as boxing skills and stuff like that. Not that it's appearing to really hurt him, but he's got a huge by the 12th round, Weaver does finally hurt Tate, but now he needs a knockout. And I know I was rooting for Weaver. I still remember this was one of the craziest fights ever. And then in the 15th round, it's kind of over. There's less than a minute left. Tate's got, there's not much, nothing
knocked him out. I remember this. He knocked him out with 45 seconds left. One big shot puts him on his – and if you remember, Tate landed on his face and his legs kind of shook.
He just laid there on the ground for way more than the 10 seconds there. Didn't even move. Yeah, it didn't look like he appeared to move. It looked like he was just a one punch, actually, I guess a punch that actually sort of hits another punch as he's landing. But, man, that was the most devastating thing. I just remember jumping up and screaming. I was rooting for Weaver, I guess because of the Holmes fight. And it was just crazy that I still to this day have never had chills like that of a fight having such a turnaround from just, after – it's a 50-round bout's about an hour, 59 minutes, and after 58 minutes and 15 seconds, Tate's got this thing, and all of a sudden the Weaver shot, and it made me so happy because for whatever reason I didn't feel like Tate was a champion, though he was, but I felt like Weaver was a champion after he beat him. That's kind of unfair, but that's boxing.
Yeah, and the thing I remember from all of this is, if you remember at the time, this changed history. Because John Tate, I'm pretty sure, was signed to fight Muhammad Ali.
Oh yeah, they were both. There was Muhammad Ali. That was the talk of maybe setting up either one of them possibly. But yeah, Tate would have been an interesting opponent for Ali. But Ali, if Ali's in the same trouble he's in with Holmes, then I guess Ali's going to be in a real trouble no matter who he's facing.
Yeah, because he didn't hit hard enough to get him to one punch knockout that John Tate was susceptible to.
Having Weaver, beat up or injure Ali would not look good for Weaver either. So, but they did comment that this is the real heavyweight championship. That the Holmes Ali was kind of not a very good fight. So it gave more credibility to the Weaver win.
Well, see, the other thing is this though. It gave more credibility to Larry Holmes being the champion because he'd already beaten Mike Weaver. And the other thing that I think people forget was this was in Knoxville, Tennessee, which was basically Big John Tate's hometown. And I know Mike Weaver, when I interviewed him, said the big mistake Tate made was listening to the crowd. He was still trying to knock me out instead of just staying away from me.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, Weaver knows he's in the ring with them. Yeah, I didn't feel watching it that Tate really fought the round foolishly or stupidly. It looked like Weaver was just closing the ring on him. But I guess you're right. He could have bicycled more or something. I don't know.
You stay the hell away. Just run from him.
Yeah, it's true. That's what Michael Spinks would do. Michael Spinks, I loved it, but he said, in the 15th round, and I'm not playing games. And I guess you're right. It appeared that it was over before it was over. And just, good for Weaver that he just, stayed focused because he didn't look desperate. He just stayed sort of focused. And there's still another 45 seconds, and he made good use of it.
Yeah, and then next up, like I said, he's becoming kind of a household name. I think this was on CBS Sports. But he goes to the Sun Bowl in Sun City, Northwest South Africa, to fight Harry Coetzee. Now, the thing about this is I think everybody needs to watch this fight because I think this is one of the underrated great heavyweight fights you can see. It's been a while since I've seen it. You saw it, and I think this was a great fight. I mean, Coetzee, I thought, was controlling the early part of the fight. And
he did.
Go ahead.
Excellent boxing skills. Coetzee is really an underrated guy. And, again, the whole South Africa thing is unfortunate with apartheid and stuff. But it also goes back for Weaver because Weaver's not really in control of his destiny. Even though he's a champion, he has to go to South Africa. And the referee might as well have put on, the colors of Coetzee, letting Coetzee get away with murder.
Yeah, but he went to South Africa because he made a lot more money than he would have fighting at home because he was paid. Weaver was paid like over $2 million for this fight, plus 40% of the TV money that was negotiated by Bob Arum. Coetzee only got 150 grand. So I think that, I mean, Larry Holmes, when they talked about Holmes fighting Coetzee at this point, I know they eventually scheduled a fight for Vegas that ended up getting canceled in early '83. But Larry Holmes was, I mean, he was planning on going there too because the money was like 3 times what he could have made here.
Yeah, I got to give at least Coetzee credit for this because now I get to watch several of his bouts just over the last few of our interviews, and he's really a hell of a good boxer. He really is, and his skills improved. And when he fought Weaver, he had never been stopped or even knocked down, even as an amateur. And then in the 13th round, he was clearly leading, and Weaver probably needed a knockout, and Weaver got that knockout, one punch, and Coetzee is down, and he ain't getting up. So Weaver had the reputation as the one-punch boxer, and that referees were supposed to know, though it would come into controversy later, to, hey, give Weaver a chance. You know, he might get behind in a fight, but don't give up on him. So that's an excellent fight, and I'm really actually glad Coetzee later on, you know, got his part of the championship. He's a hell of a good fighter. And
he was a damn good fighter. Knocked out Michael Dokes in the 10th round in Dokes' hometown of Cleveland.
Spinks
huh?
There were 3 times he knocked out Spinks in the first round when Spinks that followed Ali.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a real good fighter, so I'm glad he got his sort of thing. But then, because of not really his fault, but the whole apartheid thing sort of fell on him to not really give him the kind of recognition because of something that
he didn't get the recognition, Chris, because the first title shot he got against John Tate was one of the worst fights in heavyweight title history.
And it didn't feel like a heavyweight. I know.
Yeah, and then he lost to Weaver. So, I mean, really, if he would have beat John Tate, and if he'd have beat Tate in 79 when he fought him, if he beats Tate, and he would have gone on to get a shot at Larry Holmes. So it's his own fault that he didn't get that shot because he lost those fights. And the John Tate fight, when you look back at it now, you really wonder how the hell he lost to him, other than the fact that Coetzee just had a tendency to gas out after about the 7th or 8th round.
You're right. He did actually have trouble with trying to go to me a little bit for the knockout or something and not being able to do it and gas himself out a little bit.
Yeah, but luckily when he fought Michael Dokes was so coked up that he was in worse shape than Coetzee.
And regardless of anything else, arrogance, whether people liked him, didn't like him, the reality is who's the heavyweight champion? Larry Holmes. And that's just the way it felt and seemed like.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is if Coetzee beats Tate in South Africa, I think in 1981 you could have saw possibly a super fight in South Africa between Larry Holmes and Harry Coetzee because the money would have been so big you wouldn't be able to turn it down.
But I would say at least at that point that would be a real good time for Holmes to take him on, and not 2 years later when I think Coetzee did improve his skills and his stamina and such.
But see, I think this. I don't think Coetzee ever beats Holmes just for the fact that he's not going to knock Holmes out because nobody did until Holmes got old. So even if you go 1983, I think Coetzee wears down.
I think he's a better fighter 2 years later, but he still loses to Holmes.
Yeah, because I think the heart is something that's hard to beat with Holmes that I think a lot of people fail to take into consideration.
Right. When he looks like he's going to lose Weaver, he starts going into all cylinders of the mind of what he's going to do to save himself up, when to box, when to do this and when to that. Holmes, when he's really focused, is a great one that he has to be acknowledged as. And that's when he will go into that zone. And you're right, Coetzee, I don't think can do much when Holmes is onto him. And he would be because if Coetzee started getting all the attention for the white-black thing, that gets Holmes riled. And Holmes riled is a hell of a good fighter. One of the best.
Next up, he's supposed to fight Jerry Cooney. They had a tentative agreement for October 22nd, 1981. Now, from what I remember, Chris, because I remember watching CBS Sports in 1981, and they announced on there that they were going to show Weaver Cooney. So I don't even think it was supposed to be closed circuit. Either that or they were going to show the rebroadcast of it. But the WBA, in their infinite wisdom, said that Weaver had to fight James Quick Tillis next or be stripped of his title, even though Cooney was ranked number 1 and Tillis was ranked number 3. But the organization said that, hold on, this is the organization's excuse. They said that Tillis was the highest ranked contender when Weaver was due for a mandatory defense in March of 1981.
Yeah, I think it's very disappointing. Weaver Cooney would have been a really
Great fight,
great
and they cost Mike
showcase.
Weaver probably his biggest purse.
And Tillis couldn't have gone out of his way to be a more friggin' annoying boxer type guy, a real big guy, first guy to go, the distance with Tyson. But they're sort of praising Tillis' skills the first 3 or 4 rounds, and only after that, everybody's booing him, booing the shit out of him. The guy's not doing anything, and then
Yeah, because it's a fight Tillis could have won.
Isn't going to do much. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Considering this is the opportunity of a championship, it's hard to believe what in the world's going on in Tillis' head. Finally, Dundee's in his corner and tells him to fight southpaw, or Tillis does. In the 11th round, Tillis fights southpaw. All of a sudden starts looking better, and then he switches back. And he just looked like he couldn't get a fire into his engine. I feel like he's got a cowboy hat on, this big twig sticking out of his mouth. He's just ready to graze the farm or something. He doesn't look like he's serious that this is a big fight. And so Weaver's, not doing as much either because Tillis is mostly backing away, and the fans just booing and booing and booing, and I don't blame him. Tillis this is one of the most frustrating championship fights ever. Tillis is undefeated at the time, and Dundee's in his corner. But I would start throwing punches, start doing something. It's a really boring, frustrating fight, and Weaver didn't even look like he was all as prepared. He hadn't fought in a little while, and he kind of just, you can't take it away from him, and he did win, but it's a really dull, sad championship fight.
Yeah, then next up, he fights Don King's boy, Michael Dokes. And Joey Curtis, I know this was like a few weeks after Dooku Kim died, and the story that Curtis always told was he was chosen as the referee the morning of the fight, and the Nevada State Athletic Commission kept bringing up to him Dooku Kim. He said that's all they stressed in the meeting. Kim was always in the back of my head, and that's why I stopped the fight so quick. But there is no doubt Weaver was fine. Weaver got screwed here.
Yeah, it's a really tough one because there was even talking with Keith Jackson. A lot of people thought maybe this thing is fixed or something, but there's just no way. The way it turned out, Dokes knocked Weaver down legitimately in the first round, and then Weaver's covering up, and Dokes is just throwing a lot of punches, and the referee stops it when it's very frustrating stoppage, but there's no way anybody fixes a fight like that, in that way. But it was frustrating for Weaver, who probably, had learning that these fights go 15 rounds and learning how to, build his endurance and such. And so to have it stop so abruptly, they did have the rematch and such, but it felt like when all said and done, Weaver got screwed. And unfortunately, it's boxing and such. But the rematch is incredibly frustrating because Weaver clearly defeats Dokes, gives him his first loss, and then calls it a draw. Not one of the judges gave Weaver the decision. And Weaver winds up never being champion again, and just a really frustrating way for him to lose.
Yeah, and Dokes Weaver was a really good fight, the second one.
Oh yeah, but I think Weaver clearly won, and certainly that none of the judges gave the decision. One gave Dokes like a 4-pointer, and then
I'll tell you this though, I do think the fight was close.
Yeah, I mean, Dokes didn't fight badly. Oh, yeah, and Dokes didn't fight badly. I don't blame him for anything. I don't think there's any kind of a fix or anything like that.
Now, if either one of the two, I believe this, Chris. I believe there was no way Mike Weaver was going to be allowed to win either fight against Michael Dokes.
Zach, you're certainly right with the pocket man and the puppet masters there. It can be very tough,
Which makes it hard for me to believe that they weren't fixed.
Just that Weaver always felt like the odds were sort of against him, even the ones we pulled out. It seemed like that he's always in the other person's hometown.
Well, don't you think a lot of that's from coming out of the military, not having a guy like Don King? He was the guy fighting Don King fighters at the start of his career, which is why you got so many losses.
It started the crack up during the original Holmes-Weaver fight, where they go, you know what? If Weaver pulls this off, boxing's going to be taken out of Don King's hands. And there's just a chuckle of, wouldn't that be great? But it didn't work out.
Luckily, it has been now. So he's been out of it for a while. Next up, third meeting with Stan Ward. He wins by a TKO in the 9th round. He basically, it's been a while since I've seen this fight, but I don't know if you saw this one or not, but the thing that I remember was Weaver just relentlessly going to the body against Ward.
Yeah, Weaver was a good body puncher, and he's fighting smarter. I actually think that he really started preparing for these longer bouts, and the sort of once you start pounding on the body, that it starts taking the wind out of somebody. I don't actually remember the fight. I couldn't YouTube it and such like that, but I love that. I pulled this thing out of YouTube also because that sounds like a fun one to watch.
Oh, maybe I'll put it on YouTube. I got to find it then. All right,
Okay.
next up. Wins a few nondescript fights, still ranked, gets a shot at Pinklon Thomas, who was the newly crowned WBC champion. Once again, WBC champion, and he was run by Don King, which, you know, whenever you run by Don King, you got a better chance. But he did stop him. And this is Pinklon Thomas. This Pinklon Thomas was good enough to hang with most anybody you'll ever see.
You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, as time does its thing, and I'm still a huge Mike Weaver fan, I kind of get down a little bit on Pinklon Thomas. But it's unfortunate because at that moment, he's undefeated, and hell of a jab, really strong jab. And eventually took Weaver out, just a one punch right. Knocked Weaver down in the first round, and then Weaver came back, and it was a hell of a fight through the eighth round.
Yeah, that fight was scored even going into the eighth round.
Yeah, and it was just a great fight that probably people don't remember too well, or just again how great a fighter Pinklon Thomas was at that moment, because that moment was going to go away soon. But
well, yeah, it was going to go away though because of Mike Tyson, and not because Mike Tyson beat him. But I believe this, and I've talked to Pinklon Thomas before, and he's been on our shows, and we did like an hour and a half interview with him, and his whole thing was the Trevor Berbick fight. Because if you watch that fight, I think Pinklon Thomas won it. But you know what? If you have a young heavyweight by the name of Mike Tyson, would you rather him fight Pinklon Thomas, who has skills, or would you rather fight Trevor Berbick?
I've seen that fight, more than once. I actually think Berbick did win. I think Thomas had to leave you after maybe 10 rounds or so, and then he just sort of, not really doing anything. It looked like a completely different fighter, and Trevor Berbick, started getting some steam that you don't usually see out of Trevor Berbick.
Well, Pinklon also threw the part in that he started doing drugs and stuff around then.
You're right. You're exactly. And I do enjoy his interview. Your interview with Pinklon Thomas is one of my favorites because it's interesting and sad. It's just a reminder that how tough boxing is, and this vibrant guy who took out Mike Weaver legitimately. Great win for Pinklon Thomas. Boxing's a real rough sport, and I think he did a great job getting what he could out of Pinklon Thomas, but it's just a tough sport, and I admire the man for hanging in there in life because boxing's brutal.
Yeah, and then everybody thinks Mike Weaver's done. Carl the Truth Williams had given Larry Holmes a tough go for the title about a year before this fight, and I think this was the main event with the undercard was either Tyson Ferguson or Tyson Frazier, but Carl the Truth Williams, who was a big underdog or a big favorite against Mike Weaver, found out exactly how hard Mike Weaver punched when Weaver dropped him with a left hook to the chin in the second round. He gets knocked down 2 more times, and now all of a sudden, Mike Weaver's relevant again, Chris.
Oh, yeah, it came sort of out of nowhere. And Carl the Truth Williams, again, I usually, how you remember these things, Tyson knocking him out in the first round and stuff. But when he fought Weaver, he'd only lost once professionally. He hadn't fought that many bouts when he fought Larry Holmes. Went to decision with him, a really great amateur fighter. So he's used to winning and stuff. And Weaver, he looks like a great first round. And then the second round, Weaver, bam, just a solid knockout. Again, the type that if I'm watching it, like my girlfriend, she'll jump up, because fuck, what do Weaver do? His knockouts are very special, and that's a special one. And Carl Truth Williams, he just been a different level at the pros, and Weaver nailed him. It was a good win. Both of them needed the other one needed the other name in a sense, and for Weaver it was a very good win to kind of put him back up there, and he stayed in the top 10 for a little while. So
yeah, so that gives him a shot, and he gets a shot. He fights James Bone Crusher Smith. Bone Crusher knocks him out. He loses tough, hard-fought split decision to Donovan Ruddock. So he is, so he's still a relevant player. I mean, these are 2 really good fighters. And Smith,
Ruddock and Bone Crusher Smith just looks like a giant. He looks like from another world, even amongst heavyweights. And he does punish Weaver pretty bad in a first-round knockout. It seemed like a different Bone Crusher Smith that I see in other bouts, but Yeah, that one crushed Weaver. And then I thought he beat Razor Ruddock, but Ruddock was set up to beat Weaver, as a name, and that's the way it turned out. But I do think Weaver won the fight, even though it didn't win a decision, a split decision.
Yeah. But so after those two losses, people think he's done again. James Pritchard, who was a guy that reminded people of Mike Tyson, was undefeated. He was 15-0. He was from Louisville, Kentucky. So they bring Mike Weaver to Louisville, Kentucky to show everybody how good James Pritchard is. Mike Weaver knocks him out. And then they take him to South Africa to fight Johnny Duploy, who was 17-0 and was supposed to be the next big thing in South Africa. And he knocks Duploy out. There's a pattern here, Chris.
Ring Magazine has him in the top 10, and Weaver, 3 knockouts in a row, or at least the Duploy he gassed himself out in the third round, really, and then in the sixth round, after the sixth round, he retired and wouldn't continue. But Weaver's still looking good, but he has to go to other people's places. It's really all again. It makes me admire the man more because it feels like he doesn't have a break. Where he's the one that, even though the fans love him throughout wherever he is, even in the hostile areas, they'll hear Weaver, Weaver, Weaver. He's got his fans, and I'm one of them who really admire the man. But he's getting up there in age, and he's had his moment. Probably the first round knockout loss to Bone Crusher Smith is probably the last time you really think he's going to, do too much. But you never know. And it was a good win against the undefeated Duploy, before the rematch and stuff.
Yeah, come to find out, neither one of them were very good. But then Duploy beats him by a second round knockout in a rematch, and that's pretty much it. He becomes kind of the guy you got to beat to get to the next level, and I'd say probably his last hugely significant fight was probably against Lennox Lewis in 1992.
Oh, absolutely. Now he's a grandfather and 40 years old, and it was one of those things where the announcer was saying, "Please, Mike Weaver, do not fight again. Please do not fight again." It's just that's a really sad mismatch, and Lennox Lewis didn't do anything out of line. He's 15-0, and that's a name. And Mike Weaver's a decent payday, but it does feel unfortunate. I mean, Weaver didn't just get beaten, punished in a way that you sometimes see these champions, but it is unfortunate.
All right, Chris. And then, of course, he's got one last inning where he beats Bert Cooper. But that was pretty much it for Mike Weaver. He fought Larry Holmes in basically an old-timers card and got knocked out in 2000. But I think when you look at Mike Weaver's career, the thing that stands out is, as you said, he didn't have the advantages so many others did, and that meant no amateur career, basically no amateur career. Probably not proper management at the start of his career.
Yeah,
he had to go fight everybody on the road. I mean, this is like an NFL team that, wins 10 games, but they had to play all 16 games on the road. It's just amazing that he had the ability to do that. And to me, that's why I had admired him so much. That he wasn't a guy that talked a bunch of crap. He just went out and did his job.
Yeah, very disciplined. I always feel like he's a Marine out there doing on a mission. And it did feel like he kind of had everything against him, the backing, not the crowd itself. The crowd sort of liked him. It's just he was always in the hometown of somebody else. Referees wouldn't give him a break. The judges wouldn't give him a break, it didn't seem like. And yet he stayed special. The Holmes fight and the Tate fight itself, just amazing. And that we haven't done John Tate, and I'm not sure we will do John Tate, but Weaver is very special. And I think we both want to do him for quite a while. And it is just kind of, it's an underdog Rocky. It just feels like, what, he doesn't cry about, not having a break. He just goes out there and does his thing and had a very, a great legacy when all said and done.
All right, Chris, what do you want to do next?
Well, get you Tim Witherspoon. I know he's, two-timer, one of your favorites. I'd love to do Buster Douglas sometime, but I got to admit he's got a couple boring fights mixed into all his career. I always want to do Oliver McCall sometime because of the unusualness of him, but Witherspoon might be a good one if you're unless the other ones.
We can do Tim Witherspoon. It's whatever you want to do.
That sounds good.
All right, guys. So in 2 weeks, me and Chris will be back. Old Time Boxing Show to talk a little Tim Witherspoon. I want to remind you to follow us at Grueling Truth. Check out all of our articles, including articles by Christopher Shelton. There's a bunch of them on there. Just search his name when you go into the toolbar on the Grueling Truth. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find the Grueling Truth. So, for now, This has been Christopher Shelton. I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.